The air itself shrieked, a metallic banshee wail that tore through the very fabric of existence. Explosions, guttural roars of compressed destruction ripped the earth apart, flinging soil and shrapnel into a sky already choked with the acrid stench of cordite and burning debris. Dust, thick and suffocating, swirled like a malevolent spirit, obscuring vision and clinging to every exposed surface. This was the overwhelming cacophony of war, a brutal symphony of human suffering and mechanical fury, played out on a stage of desolation. Amidst this hellish ballet, a lone figure moved with a practiced, weary grace. Cale, a soldier whose youth had been prematurely etched away by the relentless grind of conflict, navigated the chaos. His face, a mask of grim exhaustion, was streaked with dirt and sweat, his eyes hollowed by sleepless nights and the unspeakable horrors they had witnessed. Each step was a testament to sheer, unyielding will, a mechanical function of survival rather than conscious choice. The rhythmic thud of his boots against the shattered ground was almost lost beneath the constant barrage. Yet to him, it was a drumbeat of his own fragile existence. An internal monologue, a silent scream against the external din, raged within him. The constant fear gnawed at his insides, a relentless parasite feeding on his courage. He had seen too much, lost too many. The faces of fallen comrades flickered behind his eyelids, brave men, good men, reduced to statistics and memories. Each loss chipped away at his spirit, eroding the foundations of his hope, leaving behind a barren wasteland where optimism once bloomed. He wondered, in those fleeting moments between one shell burst and the next, how much more he could endure before he, too, splintered into irreparable fragments. His left hand, calloused and scarred, instinctively sought the worn locket nestled beneath his uniform. Its cool, metallic presence was a small, anchoring weight against the storm. It was a tangible link to the life he had left behind, a life of warmth, laughter, and an innocence that now felt impossibly distant. Inside, a faded photograph of his wife and daughter, their smiles radiant, served as both an agonizing reminder and the last flicker of light in his encroaching darkness. Their love was the fuel for his last reserves, the whisper of a promise he desperately clung to, a reason to push through the agony and the despair. Suddenly, a blinding flash erupted just meters away, a supernova of white light and concussive force. The ground bucked violently beneath him, throwing him off balance. He felt himself airborne for a terrifying instant, then slammed against something hard and unyielding. Disoriented, his ears ringing with a high-pitched whine, Kyle struggled to regain his bearings. When the world finally stopped spinning, he found himself alone, separated from his unit. The familiar shouts and commands of his squad, the comforting presence of their synchronized movements, had vanished. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any noise. It was not a true silence, but a muffled, suffocating void, punctuated only by his own ragged, desperate breathing. The distant rumble of artillery fire seemed impossibly far away, a ghostly echo of the battle he had just been part of. He tried to move, to call out, but his throat was dry, his limbs heavy. He was trapped, exposed, lying in the open ground, with no immediate escape route in sight. The chilling realization dawned upon him with a sickening lurch. He was utterly alone, surrounded by an enemy whose presence he could almost feel in the oppressive stillness of the air. The vast, desolate landscape stretched around him, an empty stage awaiting an inevitable, terrifying confrontation. Kyle, cornered and vulnerable, his body aching from the fall and the crushing weight of his predicament, felt the present moment dissolve around him. The desolate landscape and the chilling silence faded, replaced by a vivid, almost hallucinatory rush of memories from his life before the war. His mind, in a desperate act of self-preservation, retreated to the sanctuary of his past, a stark contrast to the brutal reality he now faced. He saw Alara, his wife, her eyes sparkling with an enduring warmth that even now, through the fog of memory, sent a tremor through his weary soul. He remembered the scent of her hair, the soft touch of her hand, the quiet strength that had always been her defining characteristic. Her laughter, a melodic chime, echoed in the chambers of his mind, momentarily drowning out the phantom screams of the battlefield. Then, Lily, their daughter, a mischievous whirlwind of joy and innocence. Her tiny hands reaching for him, her toothless grin, the way she would bury her face in his neck, her small body radiating pure, unadulterated love. These faces, etched into his very being, had once been his greatest source of strength, the unwavering pillars of his existence. Now, in this moment of profound isolation and danger, they served as a painful, almost unbearable reminder of everything he stood to lose. The thought of them, living their lives oblivious to his terror, was a torment more exquisite than any physical pain. A specific memory, sharp and poignant, pierced through the haze. It was the morning of his deployment, a day heavy with unspoken fears and forced smiles. Alara, her own eyes brimming with unshed tears, had pressed the locket into his palm. Its cold metal had felt like a brand against his skin, a physical manifestation of the promise she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Come back to us, Kyle. Promise me you'll come back." Her words, a sacred vow, now reverberated in his ears, a desperate plea from a distant past that seemed to mock his current helplessness. He remembered the weight of her gaze, the silent understanding that passed between them, a communion of love and fear. He had promised, with all his heart, to return. Now, that promise hung like a shattered shard in the air, threatening to cut him to pieces. The vivid contrast between the warmth of his past and the cold, unyielding reality of his present was a cruel juxtaposition. The soft glow of his home, the comforting rhythm of family life, the mundane beauty of everyday existence, all stood in stark opposition to the dust, the blood, and the omnipresent threat of death. He tried desperately to rationalize his situation, to find a logical solution, a quick escape, a hidden path. His military training, ingrained through countless drills and real-world engagements, urged him to analyze, to strategize, to fight. But his mind, clouded by exhaustion and the brute force of the explosion, refused to yield a viable option. There was no tactical advantage here, no strategic retreat, only open ground and the encroaching darkness. Then, a sound, faint at first, then growing steadily louder, closer. The unmistakable crunch of boots on gravel, the rustle of uniforms, the low murmur of voices. They were approaching. The enemy. A primal fear, cold and suffocating, seized him. He considered a desperate defiance, a final, futile stand. His hand instinctively went to the sidearm at his hip, but the thought flickered, then faded, extinguished by a profound, overwhelming sense of helplessness. He was alone, injured, and utterly exposed. The footsteps grew louder, each one a hammer blow against his rapidly dwindling hope. The enemy soldiers were now unmistakably visible, their dark, imposing silhouettes stark against the smoldering horizon, distorted by the lingering haze of smoke and the flickering glow of distant fires. Cale's breath hitched in his throat, a raw, ragged sound, as his heart began to pound with a frantic, terrifying rhythm. It was a drumbeat of pure, unadulterated terror, echoing in his ears, threatening to consume him entirely. Every beat was a stark reminder of his precarious position, a countdown to an inevitable confrontation. He attempted to shift, to find some semblance of cover, to push himself further into the meager shadows offered by the crumbling debris around him. But a sharp, searing pain shot through his leg, a hidden injury from the earlier blast flaring with agonizing intensity, immobilizing him instantly. A choked gasp escaped his lips, the sudden agony stealing his breath and any illusion of potential movement. His leg, twisted at an unnatural angle, refused to bear his weight, betraying him in his moment of greatest need. The betrayal of his own body, failing him when he needed it most, was a bitter pill to swallow, adding another layer of despair to his already overwhelming predicament. He was a soldier, trained to endure, to fight, but his physical form had capitulated, leaving him vulnerable and exposed. His mind, reeling from pain and fear, involuntarily conjured the face of Sergeant Miller, a grizzled veteran whose cynicism was as legendary as his combat prowess. Miller had often scoffed at the notion of faith, especially in the crucible of war. "God doesn't fight on the front lines, Kyle," he'd once spat, his voice raspy from too many cigarettes and too much shouting. "Only bullets and grit matter here. Prayers for the weak, for those who haven't seen what I've seen." Miller's words, once dismissed as the ramblings of a hardened man, now echoed with a chilling resonance. The seeds of doubt, planted by Miller's grim philosophy, began to sprout in Cale's mind, insidious and chilling. "Is there truly anyone watching over me?" he wondered, his gaze sweeping across the desolate, war-torn landscape. The sky above, once a canvas of infinite possibility, now seemed a vast, indifferent expanse, offering no solace, no sign of divine intervention. The horrors he had witnessed, the senseless suffering, the brutal finality of death, all conspired to erode the fragments of belief he had clung to. If there was a higher power, why did it permit such devastation, such profound despair? Why was he, a man who had only ever sought to protect his family, left to face such a cruel, lonely end? His hand, trembling uncontrollably, instinctively reached for the locket nestled against his chest. His fingers fumbled with the worn metal, seeking the familiar comfort, the tangible connection to Ilara and Lily. But even its presence, usually a source of immense strength, offered no solace in this moment of abject terror. The cold metal felt inert, powerless, unable to conjure the warmth of their love, unable to shield him from the encroaching darkness. His fingers traced the familiar contours, but the magic, the hope it usually brought, had evaporated, leaving only a hollow ache. The enemy's voices were now distinct, harsh, guttural sounds that scraped against the silence of the night. Their language was unfamiliar, unintelligible, but their intent was terrifyingly clear. The menace in their tone, the predatory glint in their eyes as they drew closer, spoke volumes that transcended any linguistic barrier. He could hear the heavy thud of their boots, feel the subtle vibrations of their approach through the ground. They were closing in, a relentless tide of destruction, and Kyle, crippled and alone, could do nothing but brace for the inevitable. Every second stretched into an eternity, each breath a desperate gasp in the face of overwhelming despair. The world narrowed to the sound of his own frantic heartbeat and the advancing footsteps, a symphony of his impending doom. With no other options, Cale collapsed against a crumbling wall, the rough, cold stone pressing against his back, a stark reminder of his dire circumstances. His body, racked with pain and exhaustion, could no longer sustain the pretense of resistance. His eyes, heavy with unshed tears and the weight of impending doom, squeezed shut, as if by closing them he could somehow erase the terrifying reality unfolding around him. He felt utterly exposed, a broken figure at the mercy of an indifferent universe, his fate hanging by the thinnest of threads. The acrid smell of smoke and dust filled his nostrils, a constant companion in this desolate landscape of war. In that moment of profound helplessness, a flicker of memory pierced through the haze of despair. He remembered Ilara, her gentle smile, her unwavering faith, a beacon of light in his often turbulent world. She had always possessed a quiet strength, a deep-seated belief in a higher power that transcended the chaos of everyday life. He could almost hear her voice, soft and reassuring, whispering her simple prayers for his safety, for his return. Her words, once a comforting background hum, now resonated with an urgent, desperate clarity. She prayed not with elaborate rituals, but with the heartfelt sincerity of a pure soul, her petitions rising like incense before an unseen altar. A desperate, raw plea escaped his lips, a sound barely audible over the distant, relentless gunfire that continued to punctuate the night. It was not a formal prayer, no carefully constructed petition or memorized verse. Instead, it was a broken, honest cry from the very depths of his soul, a primal scream of a man pushed to his absolute limit. His voice was hoarse, raspy, strained by fear and the sheer effort of existing. He did not ask for victory, nor for divine vengeance upon his enemies. His plea was far simpler, far more personal. He asked for a sign, for a way to return to his family, to the warmth of Ilara's embrace, to the innocent laughter of Lily. His only desire was to see their faces again, to feel the comfort of their presence, to fulfill the promise he had made. The words were few, fragmented, almost incoherent. Yet each syllable was imbued with every ounce of his remaining hope, a fragile ember glowing in the encroaching darkness. He spoke of his love, his longing, his desperate need to survive, not for himself, but for them. It was a profound sense of surrender, a letting go of control, placing his fate in something larger than himself, something beyond the bullets and the chaos, beyond the reach of human malice. He had exhausted all his own resources, all his military training, all his physical strength. There was nothing left but this raw, unadorned appeal to an unknown, unseen force. He had fought. He had endured. But now he could only pray. The world around him seemed to momentarily still, as if holding its breath, acknowledging the profound vulnerability of the moment. The distant gunfire seemed to recede. The harsh, guttural voices of the approaching enemy faded into a muted hum. The air grew heavy, pregnant with an unspoken expectation. It was as if the very fabric of reality paused, just for an instant, to listen to the whisper of a broken soldier's plea. In that suspended moment, Kyle felt a strange, ethereal peace descend upon him, a fleeting calm amidst the storm. It wasn't the absence of fear, but the presence of something else, something indefinable, yet deeply comforting. He had poured out his heart, stripped bare his soul, and in that act of ultimate vulnerability, he found a fleeting, unexpected strength. He felt a connection, tenuous yet undeniable, to the unwavering faith that Ilara had always embodied. It was a faith he had often questioned, but in this crucible of despair, it was the only thing left to cling to. The prayer, born of desperation, transformed into an anchor in the swirling tempest of his terror. He waited, not with expectation, but with a quiet, profound resignation. Just as the enemy soldiers, their figures now stark and menacing against the flickering light of distant fires, began to close in, their harsh commands growing clearer and more insistent, a sudden, utterly unexpected event ripped through the suffocating stillness. It wasn't a shell, nor a burst of gunfire, but a shrill, piercing alarm, an ancient, forgotten siren buried deep within the crumbling ruins of what was once a factory complex. Its rusty metallic shriek tore through the night, echoing off the shattered buildings with an almost painful intensity. Simultaneously, a low, guttural rumble vibrated through the very ground beneath Kyle, a small, localized tremor that caused dust and debris to rain down from the precariously balanced structures above. The effect on the approaching enemy was instantaneous and palpable. Their aggressive advance faltered, their confident strides replaced by hesitant steps. Their heads snapped up, eyes darting around, searching for the source of the sudden, bewildering disruption. The tremor, though minor, was enough to make them pause, to momentarily break their focused intent on Kale. It was an unforeseen diversion, a chaotic symphony of sound and motion that pulled their attention away from the cornered soldier. This brief, almost imperceptible window of opportunity, seemingly a mere coincidence in the grand, brutal tapestry of war, felt profoundly significant to Kyle. It was a direct, undeniable answer to his desperate, whispered plea, a tangible manifestation of the unseen hand he had implored. A jolt of adrenaline, sharp and invigorating, coursed through his veins, chasing away the paralyzing despair that had gripped him moments before. His mind, previously clouded by fear and exhaustion, achieved an unexpected clarity. The pain from his hidden injury, though still present, dulled to a manageable throb, overridden by the sudden surge of primal instinct. He forced himself to move, pushing off the crumbling wall with renewed vigor, his muscles responding with an unexpected burst of strength. His gaze, sharpened by the urgency of the moment, swept across his immediate surroundings, searching, truly searching, for an escape. Then he saw it. A narrow, almost imperceptible gap between two collapsed sections of wall, partially obscured by a tangle of rebar and rubble. It was a passage he had overlooked before, dismissed as impassable in his earlier, fear-stricken assessments. Now, it gleamed with the promise of freedom, a dark, inviting maw that offered a chance, a sliver of hope where moments before there had been only an abyss of despair. The path was undoubtedly treacherous, likely fraught with crumbling debris and unseen hazards, but it was a chance, and in this desolate landscape of war, a chance was everything. Without hesitation, Kale squeezed himself through the tight opening, scraping his uniform and skin against the rough edges of the broken masonry. He moved with a newfound agility, driven by the urgency of the moment and the image of Elara and Lily burning brightly in his mind. The siren's wail continued to pierce the air, still holding the enemy's attention, their confused shouts and hurried consultations echoing behind him. He didn't look back, didn't dare to. His focus was solely on the path ahead, on the promise of escape. He scrambled through the narrow passage, his breath coming in ragged gasps, the sounds of the enemy fading behind him, swallowed by the ruins and the continuing piercing shriek of the ancient alarm. He was not yet safe, but he was free, propelled forward by an unexpected intervention that felt nothing short of miraculous. Kyle navigated the perilous, war-torn landscape with a newfound clarity, guided by an instinct he hadn't known he possessed. Each step was deliberate, calculated, a silent prayer for safe passage. The moon, a sliver of silver in the bruised sky, cast long, distorted shadows that played tricks on his exhausted mind, turning every fallen beam into a lurking foe. The air was thick with the acrid smell of smoke and dust, a constant reminder of the devastation that stretched for miles around him. He moved through the skeletal remains of what were once bustling streets, now just a labyrinth of rubble and shattered dreams. His physical wounds, a constant throb in his side, and a searing ache in his ankle, were a heavy burden. But his spirit, once teetering on the precipice of despair, now felt an unyielding resolve. The desperate plea whispered into the chaos had not been a demand for rescue, he realized, but a communion, a profound surrender that had somehow unlocked an inner strength he never knew existed. He reflected on that moment, the raw, guttural cry from his soul, understanding now that it wasn't about a specific outcome, but about connection, about placing his trust in something beyond his own failing capabilities. The locket, clutched tightly in his hand, no longer felt like a burden of fear, a constant reminder of what he might lose. Instead, it had transformed into a potent source of strength, a tangible connection to his purpose, to Elara and Lily, who were waiting for him somewhere far beyond this desolate wasteland. Their faces, once etched with pain in his memory, now shone as beacons of hope, guiding his every weary step, The journey was arduous, a relentless test of endurance against the elements and his own failing body. He battled harsh, biting winds that whipped through the ruins, chilling him to the bone, and endured days with dwindling rations, his stomach a hollow ache. The constant threat of being discovered, of enemy patrols sweeping through the area, kept his senses hyper-alert. Every rustle of debris, every distant sound, sending a jolt of adrenaline through him. Yet, through it all, there was a quiet determination that propelled him forward. Unexpectedly, amidst the desolation, he encountered pockets of unexpected kindness. A weathered old woman in a crumbling village offered him a meager portion of bread and a sip of clean water, her eyes holding a silent understanding of his plight. Later, a group of displaced farmers, huddled around a small fire, shared their warmth and a few words of encouragement, their resilience a stark contrast to the surrounding destruction. These small acts of humanity, flickering like embers in a war-torn world, reinforced his renewed faith, proving that even in the darkest corners, goodness could still be found. Each step forward, each moment of shared humanity, was a testament to the transformative power of that desperate plea, a tangible manifestation of a prayer answered not with a miraculous extraction, but with an internal shift, a rekindling of hope. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Kyle stumbled upon a makeshift outpost, a beacon of safety amidst the chaos. It was a forward operating base for Allied forces, a place he had only dreamed of reaching. The sight of friendly faces, of familiar uniforms, brought a wave of overwhelming relief that threatened to buckle his knees. He was safe, at least for now, the first true respite he had known in what felt like months. His first priority, even before tending to his aching body, was to make contact with home, to let Ilara and Lily know he was alive. The words, when he finally spoke them into the crackling radio, were choked with emotion, a testament to the long, arduous road he had traveled, guided by a whispered prayer and an unwavering resolve. The static-laced confirmation of his call's connection, a simple, "Roger that, soldier," message received, had been a balm to his shattered nerves. Days later, after medical assessment and a journey that felt impossibly swift compared to his escape, Kyle stood on the familiar porch of his home. The scent of pine and familiar earth filled his lungs, a stark contrast to the metallic tang of war. The front door creaked open, and there, bathed in the soft glow of the afternoon sun, stood Ilara, her eyes wide with disbelief, then brimming with unshed tears. Behind her, a small, curious face peeked out. Lily, a little taller, her hair a shade lighter than he remembered. The reunion was a symphony of raw emotion. Kyle knelt, his arms encircling both his wife and daughter. The warmth of their embrace, a physical manifestation of every prayer, every desperate hope. Tears flowed freely, not of sorrow, but of overwhelming joy and profound relief. He was home. He was truly, miraculously home. He was a changed man, undeniably. The war had etched lines of experience onto his face, given his eyes a depth they hadn't possessed before. But it had not broken him. He was no longer solely defined by the battles fought, the horrors witnessed, but by the profound transformation he had experienced, a spiritual journey forged in the crucible of despair. In the quiet evenings that followed, nestled beside Ilara, Kyle shared his story. He spoke of the overwhelming chaos, the despair, the moment he thought all was lost. He recounted the whispered prayer, not as a boast, but as a testament, emphasizing its power, its unyielding truth. He described the unexpected diversion, the hidden passage, the small acts of kindness from strangers. Ilara listened, her hand clasped firmly in his, her own faith echoed in his survival. She understood, perhaps more deeply than anyone else, the profound significance of that desperate plea. It wasn't just a prayer for rescue, was it? She had murmured, her voice soft. It was a prayer for peace, for purpose. And purpose he found. Cale dedicated his life to a new path, one far removed from the battlefield. He began working with returning veterans, his own experiences giving him an unparalleled understanding of their struggles. He spoke to community groups, sharing his story, not to glorify war, but to illuminate the resilience of the human spirit and the quiet strength found in moments of utter vulnerability. He helped others navigate their darkest hours, offering hope and understanding, becoming a beacon for those who felt lost. The war, a distant rumble on the global stage, continued its relentless march, but Cale's internal battle had been decisively won, his faith solidified, unshakable. He understood, with a clarity that transcended mere intellect, that true strength wasn't about avoiding the storms of life, but about finding an unshakable peace within them. It was about surrendering control, about trusting in something larger than oneself, about holding on to hope even when all seemed lost. The locket, no longer merely a sentimental trinket, still rested securely around his neck, a tangible, ever-present reminder. It was now a symbol not just of the enduring love for his family, but of divine providence, of an unseen hand guiding him through the darkest valleys. Looking at Ilara, her eyes shining with love and pride, and at Lily, who now chased butterflies in the sun-drenched garden, Cale felt a profound sense of gratitude. Their presence was a silent, living testament to a prayer whispered in the tumult of war. A prayer that had not only saved his life, but had irrevocably changed everything. He had been given a second chance, a new dawn, and he intended to live it with purpose, with faith, and with an unwavering heart.